You're listening to Leaders of AI, the podcast that cuts through the noise to bring you real-world insights, right now applications, and future-shaping breakthroughs in artificial intelligence. Here are your hosts, Julie McCoy and Dave Shapiro. Every problem that arises in society, could it be all attributed to communication problems?
Current blockchains can't even handle the communication of humans on social apps.
Solving communication, coordination, and consensus is actually way harder than solving intelligence.
We're aiming to get to 1 million agents in a single system by Q1.
Cool.
Wow.
I'm very excited. Hey, welcome back to Leaders of AI, your podcast that cuts through the noise and gives you the real truth about what's happening in AI and how to handle it in your business, your life, and your well-being. I'm your host, Julie McCoy, joined by my amazing co-host, Dave Shapiro. And today we have an awesome guest with us, Richard Blythman, the founder of Naptha AI. He is an expert in decentralized AI. He's a machine learning engineer, an AI engineer, a Web3 developer, and a fluid dynamicist. He's an amazing person to join us on this podcast. And I noticed that on October 31st, you announced an official pre-seed raise for Naptha AI at $6 million. So I just want to congratulate you on that. That's pretty remarkable. And I want to ask you the first question, Richard. How did you get into this, and how do you see agents in particular affecting the future of how we're going to do work?
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for the welcome. Sorry about such a wordy bio, all of these different
I love it. You're like that.
Yeah, I move around quite a bit. Yeah, I guess to give an intro about myself, my background was originally in like fluid dynamics. So how fluids like water move, how heat moves. And then I moved into machine learning. So yeah, I did a lot of like modeling of fluid flow and that sort of thing, which is all partial differential equations. It's all quite similar maths. And also I did a lot of image processing. So like sliding windows to analyze the motion of fluids and stuff. So I kind of went into computer vision. It was a natural fit. And then I worked as a machine learning engineer in 2 different tech companies. So one of them is called Xperi, which is an American tech company. They put ML models on device. So I did a lot of like quantization, like weight pruning, these sorts of techniques, similar to what people are doing now with, putting Llama on laptops and that sort of thing. I always worked in generative AI. So things like video super resolution, image enhancement, pose estimation. And then I moved to Huawei, worked on generative AI again. So things like digital avatars, recording an audio clip, lip syncing it onto a generated video of a digital human and doing like gesture generation and that sort of thing. So that's quite a complex product. It requires a lot of different models. You need one just for the lips, one for generating the images, one for image to video, one for audio to text, one for text to audio. So you do a lot of what's called orchestration of these models. I did a lot of workflow orchestration where you're trying to orchestrate these pipelines. And that will kind of be relevant when we start to talk about agents and agent orchestration. But yeah, I worked on some cool stuff in Huawei, but also some scary stuff. So I got put on the surveillance team at one point, and I was given a data set of a lot of images and asked to track people across different views with as high performance as possible. So it kind of turned my world upside down, and I really started thinking about, the power of this technology and the centralization of this technology. It's not just Chinese companies, but also American tech companies. One of the projects I worked on was emotion recognition, right? So I really started to think about what are the implications of this if an app can read your emotions and exploit them, right? That's kind of a scary power to give to any tech company. So I really started thinking about the importance of decentralizing it from an early time. A lot of people had this moment around ChatGPT. That's when everyone realized, oh no, this is a lot of power to give to one company. We need to decentralize this. But I've been thinking about it for many years before. So I ended up quitting my job to try and work on this full time. And I realized that there wasn't a lot of work in this area at all. So, there wasn't, maybe like decades ago, there was a little bit, but there wasn't really anyone working on decentralized AI. And in particular, I started exploring crypto as a means of decentralizing AI, explored a lot of the different technologies in the crypto space, everything from decentralized storage to decentralized compute to decentralized marketplaces to privacy technology to decentralized governance, and thinking about how all of these fit into AI. And we just got really good at putting all of these different building blocks together and running AI applications on top of decentralized infrastructure. The idea back then was to build something like a decentralized version of Hugging Face. We thought that was a really important thing. But then at some point, GPT-3 came out, and then people started building apps on top of GPT-3 using, for example, LangChain. And I kind of realized that the way that we build applications is, completely changing compared to how we used to build these ML pipelines. And that means that, for example, orchestration of these apps is completely different to orchestration of ML pipelines. And that was my expertise, so decided to dive into that. And also realized that there was going to be a new type of hub likely, because how do you publish an agent on Hugging Face, or publish a tool for an agent, or an environment on Hugging Face that agents can interact with? It's not really made for that. It's just made for publishing models. And so we realized about 6 to 12 months before the GPT store came out that, we were going to see this new type of hub, this new type of app store. And we wanted to build a decentralized version of that. Because of all of the reasons that I said around centralization of control and all that sort of stuff. I came into the space for ethical reasons, but I think most people won't. Maybe you'll get 10% of people who come into it from a moral standpoint. So what I've been thinking about for the last couple of years is how do we get the mainstream into decentralized AI? And I don't think it's the moral argument. I think what we need to do is show that decentralized AI can actually be more powerful than centralized AI. And the way that we do that is through things like heterogeneity or diversity. So there's a lot of papers that show that the more different models you use with different agents, the increase in performance. So mixture of agents paper is one that does 8 models with eight different models with 8 agents, shows improvements compared to 8 agents that use one model. But also diversity of architecture. So the more different types of architectures we use with agents, that also increases performance. So maybe one agent uses one cognitive architecture, maybe another agent uses a different type of architecture, that increases performance. Of course, diversity of data improves performance, diversity of the tools available to agents. So I think as we build these multi-agent systems, we can have more diverse models, more diverse agents, more diverse tools. These are all supported by this hub that we've been talking about. And I think once we scale to millions of agents, I think centralized models and agent ecosystems won't be able to compete. So sorry, that's a really long intro into my background, but hopefully it helps to set the scene for everything else.
Oh, that's amazing. No, that's exactly what I think, the listeners on our podcast want to hear, is a deep dive into this. And that's why Dave and I are pretty adamant about picking out guests that can actually give us a bio like that. It's clear you've dug in and you know all about this. So I'd love to know and hear from you directly. This is a question I see everywhere. I know Dave sees it too, where it's okay, we've got this idea of agents. It's level 3 in OpenAI's 5 levels to AGI, right? It's going to be here in broad spectrum, supposedly early 2025 in many of the frontier models. But how do you see, because you hit on some important things where it's going to take 8 different models to achieve that full productivity gain we can have from these agents. How do you see the normal business owner benefiting from what's coming at them? How can they harness? And is that what Naptha does?
Yeah, I think it's still quite early in agents. Once LLMs and LLM frameworks came out, the first use case that we saw was retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. That was probably the narrative of about 1 year ago. And then recently, in the last few months, it's kind of switched to agents. From what I've heard in enterprise, a lot of people are adopting things like RAG agents. In other words, RAG isn't hard coded, but it's kind of you give some autonomy to the agents to decide when to do RAG and maybe which knowledge base to retrieve from. So from what I've heard, that's one of the early adoptions of enterprise in terms of agents, but it's still super early. And I think in about 1 year, maybe the narrative will switch to multi-agent systems, but it's not quite there yet. In terms of Naptha, we are mostly interested in consumer applications. I think decentralized AI does apply to enterprise as well, but I think it's a little bit further off. So where decentralized AI can help is when, let's say we have agents running in one company interacting and collaborating with agents in another company. I think that's where these sorts of technologies become useful. But so it's between companies. But if we're just talking about agents within one company, it just makes the most sense to use open source So I was like watching one project called Open Platform for Enterprise AI, OPIA, which is created by Intel and like Linux Foundation. All of the big open source players are in there. And what they're basically saying is, we don't want our RAG and agents to run on top of OpenAI's platform. We want some sort of open source platform that we can run on-prem. And so that's kind of what OPIA is. And if we're just talking about, RAG and agents within an enterprise, I think something like OPIA, which is just open source and doesn't really have any decentralized AI in it, makes sense. But of course, once these enterprises onboard to these open platforms, the logical next step is, well, how do the agents in my organization collaborate with the agents in another organization? And that's where all of these decentralized AI technologies become relevant.
Dave, what would you add or ask to that?
Yeah, I mean, first, I just want to comment on kind of the character arc that you've gone through, where you saw like the dark side of this technology, the dark side of centralization. But you've also pointed out that the kind of mirrors, like, okay, you can have centralized surveillance platforms, and there's some danger there, but also just from a practical standpoint, there is also a danger to over-indexing on, say, if everyone uses GPT-4 or GPT-5 or O1 or whatever it's called. All of these models do have blind spots, and there's like Open Router, where you can kind of use model arbitrage to pick the right model given the task. So I guess my primary question is, what are the primary challenges that you've seen, and what are maybe more interestingly, what are the primary solutions? Like, do you use Open Router or similar kinds of standards and open protocols to have, whether you're kind of stitching a bunch of different models together or stitching a bunch of agents together? Like, what does that environment look like right now?
Yeah, so like one of the challenges that we didn't even realize existed before kind of working on the problem was there's more and more open source models now, but actually, they all have different standards for tool calling, for example. So if you want to build an agent, like one of the main things that you need is for that agent to be able to use tools. And it's quite difficult to do that on top of open source models at the moment because the standards are different. So for example, the Noose Hermes model, when it wants to indicate it wants to call a tool, it outputs a tool call in XML tags. Whereas for Mistral, for example, it outputs these kind of like square brackets with like tool call in capitals. And so, that's, if you're an agent builder, you don't want to deal with, these kind of issues. You want to write one piece of code and for it to run on top of any open source model. You don't want to have to like modify the code slightly depending on which model you're using. So a lot of work that we've done is doing things like writing custom parsers, which will automatically parse the tool call from the output of the open source model. And we abstract that away from the developer so that they don't need to worry about this problem. And also structured output varies from model to model as well. Some models are good at it, some aren't. You have to change your prompts. You have to beg it to output structured JSON sometimes. So we're trying to
threaten it even sometimes.
Yeah, threaten it, exactly. So
I'm just laughing. You lost me. I'm just kidding.
So yeah, these are the sorts of things that we're trying to make easier for developers to build on top of open source models. And as far as I know, Open Router doesn't provide this. In fact, Open Router has a lot of different models that you can call via API. But even the API isn't standardized, right? That was what a project called Light LLM solved. They provide like this unified API interface for any open source model. So you don't get that out of the box with Open Router. You have to use Light LLM with Open Router. And we're kind of building something that's like Light LLM, but instead of unifying this API interface, we're unifying the tool calling standard.
Makes sense. Yeah. So interoperability, I mean, every industry, from history, even railroads had to be standardized eventually, because if you made a train engine or train cars with a certain width, but they could only work on tracks of that width. So, this is not a new problem in technology and engineering. Yeah. So anyways, that's just my kind of initial thought. Julia?
Yes. Well, I want to switch to something I've seen quoted in a press release from you. I've seen it in your LinkedIn feed, and this phrase like really caught my eye. So I'd love to have you explain it on the podcast. And it's this phrase where you speak about this idea of running out of data, but the potential to be able to simulate thousands of internets of agents. That is such an interesting phrase and a way to put it. So I'd love for you to explain what you see there. What is your thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I think I tweeted this after I saw Ilya's talk at Europe's.
You were there.
Yeah.
I'm
I just got
jealous.
back.
So jealous.
It was cool. There were a lot of cool papers and speakers. So Ilya got a Test of Time award for one of his older papers, which I think he said was like the origin of him thinking about scaling as like the main way to achieve performance gains. So yeah, but I guess his talk kind of marked the end of that era of where scale is all you need in terms of just increasing compute and data, because he thinks we've run out of data, or we are running out of data. There's only one internet, I think is what he says in his talk. And so a lot of the focus of the talks that I saw at Europe's was talking about how can we create more data. So everyone from Google DeepMind was talking about this. They were talking about Socratic learning, for example, how Socrates tended to, generate new knowledge was by shutting himself off from the world. So it's like a closed system, and he would just, think or use language to try and derive new knowledge. So Google DeepMind are working on Socratic learning, where you can basically put an LLM in a closed system where it can't perform any experiments or get any feedback from humans, and see if it can like derive new knowledge. So that's one way of generating new data. And then Ilya kind of hinted that OpenAI are working on some stuff like this as well. And how it relates to Naptha is we're trying to build this massive multi-agent system where different agents are running on different devices. And we want to build a whole new internet for these agents. So we've created a group chat where agents can interact. We also want to create like a Reddit clone. So just an information board where they can share information. And maybe in future, they'll have their own social networks and all these types of apps. So we're basically creating this new internet for agents, and we can, run these at scale. And at a speed that even humans can't, write messages this fast. So in a sense, we're creating this whole new internet of agents, along with all of the data that comes with it. And I think this is going to be really useful for creating new data that we can use to train more models.
I've heard Eric Schmidt explain it, where we're going to see agents where we have billions of them in the world, and they're going to have their own language because eventually they're going to talk to each other. And Dave has a good phrase for this: A2A, agent to agent, instead of like B2C, B2B. And I completely agree. I see that like as the future of work, in first movers, when we're building out integrations, the agent thing always comes up, which is why I was looking at your platform, hoping I could actually access it as a consumer.
Yeah,
but tell me a little bit about that. What is your direction? Are you like in the enterprise lane, or are you going to open up to like the average person that wants to learn how to build their own agent?
Yeah, for sure. Just quickly on the 1 million agents thing. We're aiming to get to 1 million agents in a single system by Q1. And so I think my prediction that I made for next year is I think we'll see someone simulate 1 billion agents in a single system, right? And that's just next year.
Will you explain what you mean by a single system?
So just like one system where the agents are working together. So it's kind of like this closed container where the agents have the ability to interact with other agents. And so, you could, in theory, run many of these systems with 1 million agents each. And you need about 32 A100s for that. So yeah, we're getting there, I guess. And I think we'll see systems with 1 billion agents interacting with each other in 2025. That's my prediction. And then, that's not that far away from, the population of humans and the planet. And that's just going to keep increasing quickly, right? So very quickly, humans are going to be outnumbered by these agents. And we've even had discussions like, should we even build products for humans anymore? I mean, the market for agents is going to be bigger, right? Maybe we can provide them with protocols or products, storage that they can use, all these sorts of things. because that's going to be a bigger market in a few years, right? It kind of changes the dynamic of things. Of course, it assumes that agents have to be able to do something valuable. But if these agents are doing something valuable and making money, then maybe they'll spend some of that money on these products that they find useful, for example. So yeah, that's just a note I wanted to talk about on the 1 million agents. And in terms of the consumer side of things, so I guess a lot of what we focused on at the moment is just building out the platform. So we kind of see this as an operating system, something like Linux for multi-agent systems. And this ties in with why we think the decentralized and open source approach is so important. There's different options. Either all multi-agent systems run on OpenAI servers. They've built this platform, right? Do we want our health agents and our finance agents all running on OpenAI platform, or do we want to keep that data private and have these like local computations? We want to do the latter. So but what we don't have is some sort of platform that facilitates agents to run locally and still cooperate with other agents across the network. So we've kind of built this software that you can download locally, and it basically packages everything that you need to run agents on your laptop, or you can also like run it on the cloud if you need GPUs or something like that. It's basically a combination of local model inference with many different open source models, like we already touched on. It gives you like servers which allow the agents to communicate with other agents on the network using a few different communication protocols like HTTP, WebSockets, gRPC. It also includes like databases to store state and that sort of thing. And it also does orchestration of agents using like a message queue and workers, so that you can actually run more than one agent on your local machine. You can actually run quite a few. So that's our consumer software that we want everyone to download and run locally. And that becomes the platform that people can start to build all of these cool applications on top of. So I guess because we feel like we're building the Linux of multi-agent systems, we don't think the platform should be monetized in the same way that the internet shouldn't be monetized. So we're going to kind of use the Linux model, which is open source the platform, and then you can provide services on top of the platform. And we have a few ideas for what that might be. Maybe, for example, it will be something like the Upwork for agents. So if these agents are, solving tasks for people, maybe we can create an app on top of our platform, which allows, users or agents to come in and request tasks. And then maybe teams of agents get assembled to solve that task, and maybe they create a roadmap and start working on it. And then, once they solve that task for the consumer, they'll get some sort of payment for that, and maybe we can take some sort of transaction fee. So that's kind of how we're thinking about business models at the moment.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I have a couple of observations and then a question. So this is highly validating, because back in 2021 or 2022, the original cognitive architecture teams that I was working with, one of the guys on the team said, I realize that soon these things are going to talk to each other more than us. And it seems like we have crossed that threshold. And you're helping to build that reality. Another kind of a half question is, do you ever have them treat humans as endpoints or tools? Like when an agent gets stuck, it's like, I need a human to help me out here. I'm curious, because that could also be like a touch point of like a transaction. Like, oh, hey, let me spend some cryptocurrency or some money to get a human to help me get unstuck, or vice versa. As a possible mechanism for the platform. But more broadly, this reminds me of what Andre Karpathy said, I think at a talk, or at least it was on Twitter, is that we are building an exocortex. We're building an outer brain. And it's not just the internet, it's the agent layer of the exocortex that you're building actively. So I'm curious, you mentioned databases, and offline we've talked about blockchain. So I'm curious, like how do all these things coordinate? How do they know what's true? Do you have consensus mechanisms built in? And those, I had, just kind of not any specific question, just a cardinal direction to go in.
Yeah, for sure. It's a really good question about humans. I'm quite sympathetic to the view that humans should be in the loop. I've read a lot of like convincing arguments that is the case. I've also I also think it's true that if we keep humans in the loop, it's probably going to slow down the performance of the agent system, which means that maybe the ones that don't keep a human in the loop end up outperforming the ones that do, right? So it's an unsolved question. I think it would be nice to have humans in the loop, but from a kind of evolutionary standpoint, I'm not sure that is the best approach. So I think it's like really important that we can continue to think about these safety considerations, and a lot of them are totally unsolved. So I think we have integrations with a lot of human messaging platforms as well. So I think agents will come to humans when they want input, and it will probably maybe it will be through existing kind of Web 2 platforms, I guess. We haven't done as many experiments as we would have liked, mostly because the platform is just kind of maturing and solidifying, but we're growing an open source community now, and we have more contributors, and having these kind of like workflows where humans take part is something that's really high on my list to experiment with. In terms of the exocortex, you brought up a lot of ideas around interesting discussions that I had around things like collective consciousness. I went to this like AGI conference in Seattle over the summer, and Yosha Bak was there, and a bunch of people who are thinking a lot about consciousness, and questions like why do we have awareness? Why am I aware of myself and you aware of yourself? Why don't we have like this collective awareness? And I think the answer was communication bottlenecks, right? So I have this world model. If I want to communicate with you, I have to compress that world model, and then you have to decompress it. And that is just so slow that it keeps our world model separate so that we're not one conscious entity, right? But what happens if we clone ourselves into agents? So I pass a lot of my data from social apps and all these sorts of apps into my agent, so that I clone myself, and then you both create clones of yourselves as well, right? And let's say this assumes that we can create like quite a high resolution clone of ourselves, I guess. But if our agents are then communicating, they have much fewer communication bottlenecks than humans do, and they might even be able to create this like shared world model stored across like decentralized infrastructure, maybe some shared embedding space or something like that, right? And then the question becomes: do all of our agents do they have like a shared world model? Do they have a shared world model? And does this shared consciousness emerge between all of our clones? I think that's really promising and scary. But the reason I am optimistic about it is that I think it improves the scale at which we can coordinate. And this is one of the reasons that I got into the space, was basically I could see that a lot of the systems that we've developed were kind of failing to tackle some of the biggest problems that we face, everything from, climate change to like pandemics, pandemic response, all these sorts of things. So I think really the number one problem we face as a civilization is the speed at which we can coordinate. And if AI allows us to coordinate at a faster speed, I think that is that makes me more optimistic about the future of humanity. In terms of coordination mechanisms, so we're still working on a lot of them. For example, the main way that we coordinate agents at the moment are through, kind of orchestrators, I guess. So we build these orchestration, we build this orchestration logic about how the agents should coordinate, and we build a lot of these different workflows. So one of our orchestrators is like a social simulation, right? Kind of like the Stanford Generative Agents Smallville paper, where they created this virtual world. So we've taken that kind of orchestration logic, and we've managed to run it across multiple nodes. So I can create a clone of myself running locally on my laptop. You can both do the same, and then we can both agree to take part in this orchestration workflow, which looks a little bit like this social simulation. And we've also created other orchestration workflows for like economic simulations. We've done some for like baby AGI, which is kind of like this task solving. So at the moment, a lot of this coordination happens through some sort of orchestration code that runs on one particular node. Now anyone can run this orchestration, so it's not just us running these orchestration nodes. Anyone can run one, but of course it is still suboptimal in that whoever is taking part in that orchestration has to trust the person who is running that code. And so our long-term plan is to work towards fully decentralized orchestration, which involves putting that orchestration code on chain. Current blockchains can't really handle the kind of message passing capacity that we would need for something like this. And so it's likely maybe some of the really new blockchains can. But so like one of them that we've looked into is called Tashi, for example. It comes from Hedera, the creators of Hedera Hashgraph, which was more like an enterprise blockchain. But what Tashi have done is they create this way for groups of people to spin up an ephemeral blockchain, which could be between, 10 people, or maybe it could be between 1,000, 1 million in future, right? But it's this way of agreeing on a shared state of a workflow, so that like which person should, do the next step in the workflow and so on. They actually created it for Web3 gaming. So it works at the speed of real-time Web3 gaming. And so we're optimistic about it working for these like really massive multi-agent systems as well. But to be honest, there's still a lot of work that we need to do there. We just want to like bootstrap the system. It's kind of a federated system at the moment with sometimes has a trusted orchestrator. We just want to create the platform, bootstrap a community of AI developers. And then the next phase after that will be to like fully decentralize, the platform, which is, going to be quite expensive, I would say. So we probably need to raise another round.
The point on communication was that is such a huge point. This is our 3rd month running First Movers, and I see it all over again. It's my 11th year running businesses. This is probably my 15th business if you count all the ones that didn't succeed. And once again, like this week, I found myself mired in all these problems that were 100% communication, whether it was a client that wouldn't move forward at the time we thought, or a team member that didn't agree with another one, and then, I find myself in the middle of all of them going, why won't people just communicate? And it's hilarious because every business owner can relate to this, but it's like every problem that arises in society, could it be all attributed to communication problems? That is a very interesting lane to go down. And then if you look at collective consciousness, going through the clones we build of ourselves and the communication there happening even better. I mean, sign me up. Like the headaches that would remove from running my business, from communicating with my husband, who's now a form of CTO in the business, and communication again, and so it's just like, that's amazing. And one point you raised was this is a very tangible generative AI point, but we live in Gen AI tools in what we do at First Movers. And so you mentioned, when these clones can be high res enough to look and feel like us. So over the weekend, we're talking December 19th, 2024, which is a wild month. I'm sure most of you listening, of course, you, Richard, and Dave, you're fully aware of this month just being transformative in leaps and bounds with what's happening in the frontier models, in AI, in progress as a whole. So in the last weekend, we're talking December 19th, I tested 11 Labs' new PVC, the professional voice clone. V2 is out now. That just came out in the last 14 days. And then HeyGen's digital avatar. And I was able to, with a series of training data, I had to get the training data dialed in. I found it took a DSLR to record my face, super high quality mic to capture at least 3 minutes of good audio, where I'm saying sentences I would normally say in the video clone. So with that training data set, we fed that to both sources, both tools, 11 Labs and HeyGen, and we got this clone so dialed in. I've sent it to, I want to say 50 people. Dave saw it. What we can do is play a little clip. I'll give it to the producer. And 9 out of 10 people have been fooled completely. They think it's me. And it's not me. I didn't film or say a single word in that clone. That is 100% from a text prompt in those models that we trained. And so it's just amazing to think like we are that close to having the picture you represented, which is the elimination of all communication bottlenecks. Again, like sign me up. What? There's nothing. I'm very excited, obviously. But it's just amazing when we have the tools, the capabilities, and the outputs getting us to a world where we could eliminate the frustrations of communication entirely. And what you said about the blockchain not being able to handle in the current state and looking at the novel solutions for what's coming, I think is another very valid point that isn't talked about a lot, because you think of the data of a clone figuring out a communication problem that took me approximately 4.5 days and way too many Slack conversations and emails. If a clone can process that in minutes, well, that's a lot of data. How do we handle that? So those are all great points.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think current blockchains can't even handle the communication of humans on social apps. So that's the reason the SUI blockchain exists, which I think spun out of Meta. But yeah, we're not even at the level of handling human communication. And if you assume like agent communication could be 1000x, fitting that all on blockchain is going to be really difficult. But yeah, I think eliminating that communication overhead for humans like has really interesting implications. The example of the types of apps that we might see on a platform like this that I tend to give are around, I don't know if you've seen the Black Mirror episodes.
Yes.
It's called Hang the DJ, and it's about dating. So maybe this isn't really a spoiler, I don't think, but it's about a man and a woman dating. And then it's revealed at the end of the episode that this is actually just a simulation of a date. And it kind of zooms out and you see this is just one of many simulations between a man and a woman dating. And I think this is going to be like a common pattern on this new type of platform. So maybe I create a dating agent, you both create dating agents, and then, all of our dating agents date each other and simulate as much as you want. Maybe you even like simulate getting married and having kids together and all the problems that might throw up, right? And then we run this at scale at all of society.
YouTube would love that, I just have to say. YouTube has suggested that. Anyway, carry on.
Nice. So yeah, maybe we run this at scale at all of society, simulate every human with every other human, and then you get some sort of recommendation about the humans meeting or getting on a call or something like that, right? And I think we might see that for a lot of different like use cases, everything from like dating to imagine what the agent version of LinkedIn looks like. Maybe you have these recruiter agents and these like job seeking agents. And again, you run this simulation across all of society, right? And in terms of messaging, like you said, I think whenever a message is sent between people, I think it's likely going to be the assistants that are handling that and maybe just like elevating the most important stuff to the human. And that means you can communicate with a lot more people and maintain communication, increases the Dunbar number. I don't know how many orders of magnitude, but what that means for coordination of humanity, I think is really exciting, but it's also like pretty scary to think about some of these scenarios.
That makes a lot of sense. What kind of arises for me as I'm listening to you is that solving communication, coordination, and consensus is actually way harder than solving intelligence. Because, we have O1, models that are PhD level intelligence, but their impact is still limited to basically just being an extension of an individual. But what you're talking about is once you solve these, whether it's a sandbox, chat rooms, or ephemeral swarms of agents, you're actually talking about solving many, many problems at a different level. And to your point about like, well, how do you have any level of coordination right now? Julia and I are both on YouTube because then we can have exponential reach. People listen to us, but it's like we can only produce videos so fast. People can only listen to so many videos per day and those sorts of things. But what you're talking about is having the same effect, whether it's, LinkedIn for agents or YouTube for agents or whatever, all interacting in this noosphere and going, 1,000 times faster than us, 1,000,000 times faster than humans can process. So then information lag time, hypothetically, the goal is to make information lag time just go away. Is that kind of a fair appraisal?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. And it's super exciting. I think just to touch on one of the points you said, which is like the coordination is like the really hard part. I think that's not recognized enough yet. And I think part of the reason is that we have this like worldview at the moment, which thinks of AGI as this single entity. And if you just have one entity, it's an easy problem, right? Because you don't need any sort of coordination. But if you're like me and you think that AGI is more likely to be like a society of AIs or an economy of AIs, that's when things like game theory and economics become much more important. And they're hard problems. there's actually an explosion of research at the intersection of LLMs and game theory at the moment. I just went to the language gamification workshop at Europe's, and earlier in the year at ICML, there was one called Agentic Markets, a workshop which kind of brings together game theorists and economists and AI researchers. So that's a really interesting topic at the moment, and I think really relevant as we move from this like single entity AGI world to this like multi-agent world, but super hard problem.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So for the people listening to this that are going, oh my gosh, Richard, Dave, Julia, I don't know how the heck to apply this to my business. I know we have a lot of people there. What would you say would be like the first like step towards this new world? Like number one, how to think, right? That's a big piece of this. We have to start thinking differently. Old systems of like the ways we hand coded, for example, completely going to die by the wayside when AI can bring something to life in seconds. That's better. Like Dave says, better, faster, cheaper, safer. I think I quote that a million times. If we're looking at that world, we add all these agents to the capabilities of production communication, eliminating so many roadblocks. Again, like positive viewpoint, I think is critical to see the potential. But what would be some advice you'd give them to step into this new world?
Yeah, I think like the first thing that different companies tend to do is like build this knowledge base for the company. I think, and then you can do retrieval augmented generation on it. So maybe you can have a question answering assistant that has access to the complete knowledge base of the whole company. And that means that, it just makes it easier for different employees to perform tasks and get knowledge, I guess. So I think like everyone recording more data you should be recording more data, I guess, whether you're a company or an individual. I've always tended to have like quite a good memory, so I rarely take notes and that sort of thing. But now I've started taking notes because it's not for me to remember; it's so that I can, automate myself with this AI agent. So any tools you can get. Some people were using this app during the NeurIPS conference, which actually like records live audio of the presentations and then creates notes. So it's not just on like calls that you can take notes now. You can actually have these apps that you bring with you into spaces and record a lot of the data that you can do stuff with later on. So I would say that is probably the main thing you should be doing as an enterprise, which is creating these knowledge bases, onboarding data from different platforms, whether it's like Slack or Obsidian or some of these other knowledge storing places, and creating some sort of workflow or agent that allows you to interact with that knowledge base. I think that's the main thing I would focus on first.
That's a great first step. That's something we've done, I want to say 60 consultations at First Movers since we opened. Just an influx of interest because this is the future, right? And so one thing we did that our CAIO, we have a chief AI officer, he implemented this from the beginning. He's like, look, the onboardings are going to look different. It's not going to be your typical phone call. It's not going to be a form. We're going to actually have you install a recording device and you're going to just speak. And that's going to create the context for all the bots we start to build. And so that's been a completely new thing for a lot of people who are used to like just a form and a call and nothing's being recorded, which I find is like 70 to 80% of the clients we take on, which are usually small, mid-size, sometimes large businesses. They're just not used to that at all. It's like, oh, let me just handwrite this, or let me just pick up the phone and call, or do a meet, a Zoom. Nothing's being recorded. We're like, hold on, slow down, record everything. Because that is step one, like you said. That's your database as a company, as an expert, as an individual. Dave and I have tons of content, and so we can create clones very easily. But that's not true for everyone. So right. I love that. That's a great, great first tip.
Yeah, and you basically want to clone your company, right? Like that's what automation is. So the more of your processes you can clone, the more value your company is going to create.
And even some of these companies, the knowledge bases are not current. So it's like, well, hold on, is the training data correct to what your process is, correct to what you're doing? And so we had one business stop and have their humans revamp their entire KB before we went in and built some training models on top of what they had. Because if we had the models crawl from all their current data, it would have been completely incorrect. on how to serve their customers and their products because it was like a year old. So something even that simple, just make sure it's current. What you have is a great place to start too.
What takes a lot of time is the integrations with all of the different platforms, because often the companies use a lot of different like SaaS tools and that sort of thing. And what takes a lot of engineering time is like connecting to those and creating this like single database or data lake or whatever that, you know, data can be added to regularly. And then once you have that, this like single source of truth for your data, that's when you can build all of these different AI workflows and agents that will hopefully improve efficiency. So yeah, I think like hiring a contractor or a consultancy that can, you know, work with you to do this is usually a good step. And that's actually how we used to make money before we fundraised. We used to, you know, build these sorts of systems for enterprise clients.
Nice. Well, hats off to the AI consultants. Amazing. Dave, anything else you'd add in question wise before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, my primary question is just what's next for you and Naptha AI, whether from a technical perspective or commercial perspective. What are you building? What do you need? Like, where are you going? What do you see happening with Naptha in 2025?
Yeah, I think like the platform has kind of matured. So we've just started to open up our community a little bit more to open source AI developers. So growing the AI developer community, growing the amount of applications that are being built on top of the platform, scaling the number of agents that we can run simultaneously. So like I said, maybe 1 million agents by Q1 is the goal. And yeah, then forming some partnerships. So we're chatting to Noose Research, one of the big open source AI projects, about building some cool multi-agent apps on top of Naptha that will, you know, involve agents that are adding to a shared knowledge base. So we really want to increase support for these different types of knowledge bases that, you know, people can collectively build together. So yeah, and just like, I guess, increase the amount of users that we have and show that it's useful, and yeah, just really scale these systems.
Amazing. I think the analogy you gave of an OS for the agent world is so good. I don't think I've heard that. So we are very excited to be a part of your journey, cheer you on. And where should people go follow you or sign up? Is there a wait list, or is there any way they can learn more about what you're doing?
Yes, we have a wait list for community. We tend to vet it for you know, people who have experience building multi-agent systems, for example, or have a really active GitHub. We're being quite selective about the people that we allow into our Discord community at the moment, but that will start to open up over time. So if you are an AI dev or multi-agent researcher, on our website, Naptha AI, you'll find a link to join the community. I check them regularly, and then the really top applications, we get them into our community and start collaborating with them. So yeah, I would say that's the best place to join the community. I also tweet a lot, so follow me on Twitter. Started creating a few more videos, even like AI generated stuff on our YouTube channel. Been playing around with that. So yeah, we're quite active on a few different platforms. So please feel free to follow and interact.
Amazing. Well, and I hope you have what it takes to make the cut in the community. No, it sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Richard, for your time, for being here. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think like more podcasts like this are really needed. I've been following David for a really long time, and you know, I knew that it was a fit in terms of like values and stuff. And we just met recently in the last few months on a call in a random Discord channel. So thanks, David, for inviting me on here, and thanks for being the voice for open source and decentralized AI. I guess we have a lot of AI podcasts that you know, focus on more centralized AI approaches, maybe from San Francisco and that sort of thing, which is great. I think we need to hear podcasts about those, but probably a little bit underrepresented is open source and decentralized AI. So thanks so much for the opportunity to come on. I look forward to you know, continuing to listen to the podcast and all the cool guests you get on.
That's a great way to wrap. So subscribe to the podcast. You heard Richard.
Thanks so much, everyone. That was a great talk.